This is Auteur Detour, wherein three film lovers travel through the filmographies of cinema's most important directors in hopes of finding a greater understanding on the other side.
Welcome to the first episode of Auteur Detour.
I'm so excited to finally be recording with you guys.
I know.
Just want to throw that out there.
Talking about doing this for so long. No, I wasn't sure if we were going to tell the world this, but like the risk of being like Bill Murray in Groundhog Day when he starts getting disingenuous about building the snowman with like, because it's the 70th time he's done it. Like we have done a couple of these out of order. So we have talked before. So there's going to be a couple times where we say things and we're like, you really didn't like that? But we probably knew that we didn't like it. Anyway, this is a podcast about movies and directors and filmographies and trying to get to the bottom of sort of what a director's saying and what we like about them and whether their criticisms about them are valid. All kinds of things like that, but mostly it's just a way for us to talk. And that is to say that I'm Ian Hinckley, and I'm here with my friends Travis White.
Hey.
And Chris Palazza.
Hello.
And we just wanted to get on here and talk about movies for a while, because we've loved talking about movies together for years, either over Facebook or in person. And, you know, it's quarantine time, so why not spend the time doing what we like to do.
Yeah.
That's right.
It was my idea. So I started the topic with the Coen brothers, which is a pair of filmmakers that I love deeply and also have some criticism about, but you know, we'll get into that over the next, how many movies is it? 16?
18.
Too many.
It's too many. No, it's actually not too many. Considering it's been, whatever, 38 years or something.
Yeah, I think 18 movies isn't that bad over that stretch of time. It's
Yeah.
on every 2 years, you know. They're not just cranking out 2 a year or anything. Anyway.
Yeah, so before we get into the first movie, like, I'll just really quickly say my first sort of experience with the Coen brothers was Raising Arizona. Grew up sort of loving them, and then they sort of solidified themselves as I'll see whatever movie they want or they make after Fargo, and then Big Lebowski and Oh Brother Where Art Thou. They had this sort of run there that it was like, oh, okay, these are my guys in a lot of ways, you know. And it also sort of lined up with our age, you know, because I feel like we were hitting adulthood as they were like exploding the indie movie scene, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
What was your guys' first experience with them?
Well, first, Ian, I just want to say thank you for getting us together to do this. Yeah, quarantine has been really hard, and it is really, you do have to make an effort to like connect with people. And I think doing this is like a really cool way to like stay in touch. And yeah, like And yeah, kind of give me something to do even, you know, just rewatching all these movies is like so much fun. And yeah, I've always loved the Coen brothers as long as I've been like conscious of films like that are being made like as like an art form. When I was a kid, I got really into like when Turner Classic Movies came out. I always loved movies, but then like when that came out, I got really into like classic films. And then I really got into like the idea of like, that there were these classic movies that were so like amazing, and at that like around that time when Fargo came out, that was the movie where all the critics were saying like this is like a modern classic, and that concept of like a movie coming out now that could be like in the same esteem as like some of the movies that I'd like read about or seen on like Turner Classic Movies was just like a really cool idea to me. So I remember seeing that movie on video and just being blown away, and it kind of was like one of the like seminal movies for me in my like development as like a film lover and like film goer. So yeah, the Coen brothers, like obviously like, you know, two of the best directors ever. Not necessarily like my like number one favorite, like I don't necessarily relate to every movie so strongly, but yeah, every movie they make is absolutely worth seeing and really special. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. It's fantastic. Exactly what I've been looking for. My first experience with the Coen brothers was actually when I was a kid, and the Hudsucker Proxy came on television, and I remember the opening of it where the guy is falling from the top of the building, and it's just shot in such a kinetic way, and the characters just so like larger than life. I was like really kind of sucked into it, even though I didn't understand the full movie at the time. Then I recall going into college, and of course, The Big Lebowski was all the rage, and like this is a really fun movie with all this wacky stuff going on. And I actually saw Fargo after Big Lebowski, if I recall, and that one really got me into it. It raised the idea that wow, these guys can do just about anything, and I'm really interested in just about everything that they do. So after that, I pretty much watched almost every film of theirs, and in anticipation. And for the most part, I really just love them all. Right around that time, actually, for my own, development was college time, speaking of, and I actually was roommates with Travis for several years, who was a film studies major. And this guy really, Travis, I have you to blame for my crippling film addiction. So thank you for creating a monster. But no, he opened the door to like different directors and people that I might not have just picked up on from, just watching TV or seeing a trailer for, or things like that. Guys like Terrence Malick and Wes Anderson, things like that. So I'm just really happy to be here and pumped to talk about Coen brothers.
My experience with Travis with movies was we, both worked at movie merchants. Obviously, we knew each other for years and years before that. But when he came to work at movie merchants with me, which is a video store in Sonoma, he, one of the things I loved about talking movies with Travis, or media in general, is that like we both have generally the same opinion about most things, but then often for different reasons. And then also every once in a while, there'll be something that comes up where it's like, how the fuck could you like this thing that I think is terrible?
Wait.
But then like usually, and I'm not even trying to be like, like modest, but like he does generally turn out to be right about that kind of thing. I'm just going to stroke your ego a little bit. Like, here. I remember, like,
way too much credit.
Not always. Like usually I'm right. But like usually I'm right, but usually when I am right, he agrees with me. And then every once in a while, there's like a time when like, I'm like 19 and like Family Guy is on, and I like quote Family Guy, and he's like, "Don't do that. Family Guy is terrible. What the fuck are you doing?" And I'm like, no, I like it's funny.
That's like such a backhanded compliment. Travis verbally abused me until I was correct about movies.
No, you are an asshole, but so am I. So it's another reason why we get along.
All right, so let's get into this.
All right, yeah, Chris, you want to talk us through this first movie of theirs?
Yes, absolutely. So we're talking about Blood Simple this week. So Blood Simple, released in 1984, is the first feature film from the Coen brothers, Joel and Ethan Coen. It is also the film debut of Frances McDormand, who would later go on that year to marry Joel and appear in basically every one of their movies, give or take a handful. No, not really. She's in a lot of them, though. The movie opens as Abby, played by McDormand, and Ray, played by John Getz, are driving through a rainstorm. They stop at a motel to get it on, where they're unwittingly photographed together by private investigator Lee Visser. A man hired by Lee Visser's played by Emmet Walsh. A man hired by Abby's husband Julian Marty to follow them. Visser then takes the photos to Marty, who was understandably none too pleased about this affair. So Marty later tries to take Abby from Ray's home, and when he's unsuccessful, he once again enlists the services of Visser, this time to put a hit out on the two lovebirds. Visser visits the home, quietly steals Abby's gun, then photographs them again, using his sweet 1983 Photoshop skills to make photos he brings back to Marty look as though he shot them both dead in their bed. Now, Marty pays Visser his fee, but Visser then shoots Marty in the chest in his own office with Abby's gun since, hey, one dead body is better than two, and now he's got his money anyway. Visser leaves Marty's office, but not before accidentally leaving behind a snazzy lighter with his name engraved on it. Oopsie! Well, Ray, Marty's former employee, finds Marty seemingly dead in his office and with Abby's gun nearby. So thinking Abby shot him and hoping to cover her tracks, Ray cleans the scene and loads Marty's bleeding body into his car. To Ray's surprise, Marty's body moves while they're driving, clearly still alive, and after a minor struggle, Ray drives Marty to a remote field and buries Marty alive. Visser later observes both Ray and Abby visiting Marty's office, where he realizes his incriminating lighter can be found. He follows them back to Abby's new apartment and shoots Ray dead through the window from across the street using a high-powered rifle. Abby hides, but Visser enters her apartment and, using her only bullet, fires through the door, separating her from Visser and fatally wounds him. As she hears his body fall from the other side of the door, Abby says, "I'm not afraid of you, Marty." Visser, laughing as he dies on the floor, says, "If I see him, I'll sure give him the message." Yeah, my Emmet Walsh voice isn't very good. But
It'll get better.
Yeah, what'd you guys think of the film?
I love this movie. I had seen it when, I think it was the 15th anniversary when they did a re-release of it and a re-edit of it, which was, actually 3 minutes shorter than the original version. And they released that into theaters. It played at Sebastiani Theater in Sonoma. And I loved it when it came out. And, kind of hadn't seen it again until we watched it for this. Or maybe I'd seen parts of it here and there, on TV and stuff. But watching it again this time, especially with this sort of new effort to try to understand the Coen brothers and seeing it as their first, go at making a movie, I just was like, these guys came out of the gate just so fully formed. It's not like it's still a B movie in a lot of ways, and it feels like a student film in some ways, but it's so good. It has so many of their motifs that run constantly through their movies. Its acting is incredible. I just loved it. I love it.
Yeah, same. It is. I mean, that's like exactly how I feel. It's like incredible how, just fully formed their whole vision is. The performances are great. Like all the things that they're going to be known for are almost all there. The kind of hyper focus on like a specific time and a specific place, and the characters that kind of come out of that. Their kind of recurring plot device that I've pointed out to you guys of like, somebody kind of transgresses in sort of like a seemingly victimless kind of crime, and then that unleashes like sort of like an original sin, like an evil into the world that just sort of like destroys everything in its path. So it's really interesting to see this like, and just recognize it in kind of all their movies to come. It's also interesting in the ways that it sort of like isn't like their other movies too, the sort of unpolished feel in certain areas, the more exuberant camera work that sort of like isn't really what you think about the Coen brothers nowadays. Well, you see a lot
more Sam Raimi and Sonnenfeld in this movie than, their movies become so like singular later on for the most part of their vision. But, they came, into sort of this movie with like collaborating with their cinematographer, Barry Sonnenfeld, who obviously went on later to become a director himself, and Sam Raimi, who they helped make Evil Dead and went to film school with, and were, and you see a lot of that, like especially Sam Raimi is like in the burial scene is like, that's just such a Sam Raimi sequence to me. Like, I don't know, it's not as kinetic maybe as Sam Raimi movies, but like, it's just got that vibe of like, I don't know, dirty, like funny, gross horror,
Yeah. But then that scene is so similar though to stuff that comes up later in Fargo too. That whole the car crash sequence. So it's like it seems like there's they're living more in that like sort of Venn diagram area where they the interest that they sort of share with Sam Raimi or the kind of like visual ideas that they're willing to kind of humor their cinematographer with or something. I don't know. Like it seems like they're more interested in those kind of areas, the Sam Raimi areas, those like Barry Sonnenfeld kind of visual. Yeah. I don't know.
And it's funny you mentioned Sam Raimi because having not seen this movie when it first came out, I saw it like years later. But I remember watching it again when we revisited for this. The scene where Marty goes to take out Abby from Ray's home, and they're outside, and the camera like low to the ground, like an Evil Dead motorcycle shot, like creeps up all over the ground really quickly, and then zooms right up in a super close up. It's a straight up Evil Dead shot. I'm like, this is so Evil Dead,
stands out in this movie to me as like not fitting in with the movie. That whole sequence where he drags her outside and she kicks him in the balls.
Yep.
And it's just like, that seems, I mean, that's the only sequence in the movie that like feels like, I don't And then he drives up the wrong direction, and they kind of laugh about it because it's a dead end, and he has to turn around.
Yeah.
And it's like the tone of that scene is so weird to me that I don't know, it almost doesn't work. But like I agree, it's very Sam Raimi.
And I never see them. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't recall them really ever using that sort of camera trick very often ever again after that.
Well, I feel like they'd use it a lot in their next movie, Raising Arizona. Like, I feel like there is a lot of camera dollying and camera kind of zooming around. But then after that, it calms way, way down. Basically, after Miller's Crossing, I feel like they're...
Yeah, I think it's a Sonnenfeld thing, too. Like, because you do see, like... I don't know, the way... There's the shot in this movie where they enter, Marty's bar. And it sort of, like, slow pans across the bar and then like goes over the drunk person, you know, and it's like, that's like a very distinct thing. That's also not really what they end up doing usually later on, they, and it feels like that Sonnenfeld sort of Raising Arizona also. Yeah, it could shots like that.
Yeah, it could be them like kind of like submitting to an influence, or it just could be them as really young filmmakers, just really excited about like moving the camera different ways. Yeah,
I don't hate it. It's not it's just interesting.
Yeah, I mean, because they do some like really wild, like stylish camera stuff, like in their movies later, like even like in something like The Big Lebowski, where but it's usually like in dream
inside
sequences, or these kind of like, or the like kind of bookend sequences where the camera's like flying over mountains and stuff like that. It's usually like limited to very specific like areas of the movie, and it's like kind of like cordoned off from other parts, and it's sort of used like I think of it again like an orchestral flourish, you know what I mean? Like but in this movie, it does feel a little like out of left field when it happens. It feels like they're getting a little ahead of themselves, like a little excited about just moving the camera. Yeah.
Well, speaking of Sam Raimi too, I realized that they had the way they secured funding for this film was they shot a very brief trailer, essentially, and pitched that trailer to people. The trailer had none of the original actual actors that end up in the film, but it's very brief, and I think they sort of simulated the Marty scene where he's crawling on the ground or something right before he's put in the car,
getting him back from the car. Yeah.
But do you guys know who played Marty? Speaking of Sam Raimi,
I do.
It was Bruce Campbell.
Travis.
Nice.
Bruce Campbell. Yeah.
And this was Sam Raimi's idea for them because they came out of NYU Film School together. That is, Joel and Sam Raimi did, and what they did to make this movie was like. He got a list of the 100 wealthiest Jews in Minnesota, and he took it around because they're Jewish and they've got this community in Minnesota that's not huge, I'm sure. And so he takes it around to every wealthy Jewish person he knows, and he shows them the trailer, and it's all these like wealthy older Jewish people looking at this neo-noir in a time when neo-noir wasn't really a thing. Like this kind of really helped bring neo-noir into the world. And like it's this disgusting shot of like a mostly dead body like crawling across the floor, and like it's 2 minutes of that and then getting thrown back into a car, and then it just says Blood Simple across the screen, and like they secured like $1.5 million from that. Awesome. Yeah, it's really incredible way. And then nobody would distribute it, but they took it to festivals, and like critics were, wiser than studio heads, I guess, because it sort of blew up after that. And really, like, they blew up on the scene because of it,
How did it do, like, commercially?
$3 million, so it doubled its initial investment. So it was a resounding success right out the gate. It wasn't, I think, a popular success as far as box office goes, but the critics really lauded it. So it's still got like a 95% Rotten Tomatoes score and like a general overall very positive review. So commercially, it didn't do bad. I mean, it definitely doubled their money, which isn't super amazing, but I think the big takeaway that got them more of it was all of the critical success that it garnered from the critics.
That's right, and it was they did like they wrote the part of Visser for Emmet Walsh, which was like a stroke of genius for them because he absolutely. This is one of those Groundhog Day moments where like we've already talked about how much we love Emmet Walsh, but like I'm just gonna go ahead and say it again because he's so fucking good, and he's like. He does epitomize a lot of what becomes what you consider like a Coen Brothers character. Like he's got this sort of big fat face that like is I mean really like
I
this
love
sort of
him. His big
slack
fat
jawed.
face. Yeah.
I do though. He's got this like slack jawed, sleazy, like just grimy guy that you love. And
Yeah.
like, you know what I just read today was that like the reason why they put him in a Volkswagen Bug in this movie is because they're like, he looks like a bug. Like they wanted to like emphasize that he's like this giant beetle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Very Kafka-esque.
yeah,
him.
that's what they were going for. Absolutely. And like, I don't know. So they wrote it for him and they got him. He made them pay him in cash at the beginning of every week. Like he's like, and like at a certain point, I read this anecdote that like he's doesn't want to. There's a final scene in the movie where he goes to pick up his hat, even though he's like wounded, and he's like, my character wouldn't do this. And Joel Coen's like, just do it for me. Just please try it. And he's like trying to get him to do it. And Emmet Walsh doesn't want to do it. And finally he's just like, I'm doing this whole fucking movie out of like kindness to you. Don't ask me to do things out of kindness for you. Yeah. Like, I don't know. And so you can tell that like, he felt like he was slumming it, but like he gave a great performance. I don't even know. I should have looked this up, but like obviously The Jerk was before this. I'm trying to think of like what his big sort of the impression of him in culture was before this movie came out. I wonder like where they had him in mind from. I don't know. I probably should know, but I don't. Either way, he's great.
Speaking of great, we have Frances McDormand making her film debut here as well. And she, of course, will become a longtime collaborator with the Coens and married to Joel, obviously. And especially, seeing where she's come in her career, it's just really fun to see young Frances and like how she started. And she does such a great job here. It's hard to imagine someone else like doing this role. She balances.
Is this the only role she's ever played where she's like a sex symbol and like a femme fatale?
I was just thinking that, you know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, she always plays more of like the. Well,
before we started, we were saying, like, I said, like, if Tom Hanks is America's dad, then Frances McDormand's America's mom. Like,
right.
She's got super mom energy,
That's a great point. Yeah, yeah. You can imagine, I'm just picturing her with, like, orange slices, like, in high C after the soccer
Right.
practice. Like, no,
but
she
not
is
in this movie.
She is a little bit of, like, I mean, she's in it for, like, 1 minute, but doesn't she kind of play a similar character in, is it Hudsucker Proxy? Where she, or, like, is
She's
it
like
Miller's?
Barton
Yeah,
Fink.
Barton Fink. Okay, yeah. She's, like,
right?
Yeah, she's super cute in that and, like, flirty and, like, winks at somebody. Yeah.
Even
Barton
so,
Fink,
it's
or is
not,
it
like,
Miller's
I
Crossing?
don't know.
I think
They're
it's
all
Miller's Crossing.
Running together.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're probably right.
But anyway, I love seeing her in that role, and I think she does nail it. But you're right, it's definitely like against type looking back, and she's so young and so
It
so
worked
cute.
for me though. Like I was
Absolutely.
that's the word I was looking for too. Was like she's like, oh damn, get it. Like she's good looking. I get it. And like, the other main characters in the movie are Dan Hedaya plays Marty, her husband, and the, I
He's
guess
so
you would
good
call
and
him
hairy.
like the
He's so good at being Harry.
in a lot of ways he's like the he's like the body that you're following for the whole movie because, at a certain point he's dead. He's the body that won't die, which is like a classic horror, this has like elements of that in it. And, but you're following him and everybody's, illusions of him. Like they're like, Frances McDormand never knows he's dead until the final shot of the movie. You know what I mean? Like there's no,
right.
So in a lot of ways, he's sort of like the rug in Big Lebowski or the hat in Miller's Crossing. He's like the thing that's sort of drawing you through the movie in a lot of ways, or at least the idea of him. And he's fucking great. He's got another Coen Brothers face that's like, just, people
Gargoyle-esque.
listening, if you don't know who he is, he's like been in everything from like the asshole neighbor or the lawyer guy in Addams Family to like the dad
To the
in
asshole
Clueless.
lawyer guy in Clueless. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He plays an asshole lawyer. Great.
The full
and
rainbow.
He's definitely an asshole in this, but like he's got this face that just looks like a gargoyle. Yeah, like you said, like he's very like. I mean, I watched this with my girlfriend, and she's just like, she's like why does he look like that? Like, why does he, like, she, like, was almost taken out of it because she's like, how come he's so fucking weird looking?
He's so gross. He's so unappealing. He's so in his own mind and egotistical, like, constantly, like, I mean, the whole, you know, plot kind of happens because his ego won't allow, like, this thing to accept this thing. But yeah, there's always like flies buzzing around him too, right? He's just like this disgusting
fish
creature.
Open in his office. There's just like dead fish in his office. Like,
and no one questions it. No one's like, oh, yeah.
And it's Texas. Like, it can't be fresh.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then there's what's the actor's name who plays Ray? I don't even know, because this is my
Getz.
recastable. John Getz. Yeah, he's my least favorite part of the movie, and I don't think he's bad. I just don't think he pops in the way that the other three do.
It's a hard role to make pop in his defense.
You know, we did talk about it, and I did think of by now, you know, some actors that I think could have pulled this movie off better.
Do tell.
This role off better. So I'm trying to always, if we're doing this in an episode, I'm going to try to go time specific. So I'm not going to like cast, you know, a modern actor in a movie that would have came out in 1984.
Gary Cooper.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that like in 1984, you've got Tom Berenger, who I think has that like football player, like rugged, sort of doesn't talk a lot, and he can fucking pull it off, and I think he's great. I don't think he's like a great actor, but you don't need a great actor in this part. You just need a fucking guy that you trust to be like stoic and, you know,
he's more magnetic than John Getz for sure.
Right. I think he would have been great. In the same Platoon vein, but in a totally different performance,
Dafoe?
I could see Willem Dafoe.
Yes. That's awesome.
I think that would be incredible.
Do you think he might have been a little bit too scene stealing, though? Because Dafoe almost owns every scene he's in the most of the films I've seen. I don't know. I love him.
I think he's too creepy. I think it should be going from one creep to another creep, and I don't think that's what the movie was going for.
He can be non-creepy sometimes.
I was thinking of Berenger because of Platoon. And
I think Berenger is so good.
What if... And then the other one I had, and I know that you will disagree with this one because I already know your feelings on this guy, but he was clearly a fan of the Coen brothers. He fucking wanted to play the Nicolas Cage role in Raising Arizona. I think Kevin Costner has this thing.
Oh, God.
Like, he's got that, like, I mean, I don't think he's a great actor. I don't even think he's a good actor. But if you're looking for wooden, which is what this guy is, you're not going to get more wooden.
John Getz was better than Kevin Costner would have been. Sorry.
All right, fine.
Kevin Costner
Tom
was
Berenger,
a fluke.
erase that. No,
Kevin, if you're listening to this,
you got
called out.
You're on burn notice.
John Getz does great. I mean, but yeah, I mean, definitely like the least kind of successful. I think, you know, it's hard to play a role like this. You know, he's given kind of so little to do and just kind of look like worried half the movie, not talking.
Part of that is him. Like, I know that like he's supposed to be stoic and like kind of like unable to emote, you know, but there's also the part of it where like he's the one who really goes blood simple. Like, he's the one who, after he thinks that he's cleaning up Abby's mess and he, you know, drags the body into the car and then drags it into a field and he buries Marty alive, and it's like this act of just pure, like, I don't know, like lunacy. Like, who does that? You know what I mean? Like, that's not how this character would have acted if he hadn't gone completely spiraling out of control. You know what I mean? Like, he has no control. And I don't think that, like, in that moment and in the moments afterward, where even John Getz does kind of like have some moments of like wide-eyed lunacy, like, it doesn't show enough. Like, I think that like that's where Willem Dafoe would have actually worked.
Okay. You've won me over a little bit with Willem Dafoe, but as someone who's seen like every Kevin Costner movie, for whatever reason, I was a big fan of like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, Dances with Wolves. Like, he has scenes in those movies where he goes like berserk mode, and it's like, extremely boring and not.
No, he's the worst.
But,
I was mostly just
Okay.
poking the bear because I know you don't like him.
Okay.
But I also did think that like 1984 wooden guys, like
Yeah,
he's number one.
He could have ended up in the part for sure. Yeah,
know,
but I think John Getz has a real like humbleness and that like you appreciate in the movie, even if you don't buy like every moment, or at least I did.
He also works with Frances McDormand because they both feel like small town, like they don't feel like people who are like bigger than the town that they're in, whereas maybe somebody with more charisma would have. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
and
don't want that in a
that's a good
part like
point.
this.
I was gonna say he also like she manipulates him into the affair in the first scene. You know what I mean? And he kind of falls. It seems like you get the idea that he falls for her like hard, like you say. You kind of buy that part of it, right? Because of Frances, and I think that you're supposed to, think of him, like her as like a femme fatale, and him kind of like falling for her
Feminine wiles.
Yeah, exactly. Wiles is the exact word I was looking for. So I think it works in that way too, their relationship, like you said.
Yeah. I think one thing that I found really interesting, so we can sort of double back on this later, but, because they do, for the rest of their filmography and including in this one, they draw such inspiration from movies of the past. And they're such film lovers, both of them. And it shows, and they wear their inspiration on their sleeve. Like they don't hide it at all. But mostly the reason why this is sort of a neo-noir in my mind, instead of just a noir movie, besides how violent it gets and stuff like that. But like one of the things that I was thinking about yesterday, as I'm thinking a lot more about this movie, is that like in most noir movies, you get this opening monologue at the top that's over landscapes of Texas, sort of dirty, like it's a thing that they introduced later on in a lot of their movies. It's like an opening monologue or like voiceover, I guess is the word I'm looking for. And in this one, you're getting it from the detective, which is like what you would get in a film noir, except for what it does is it puts you in the mind that the detective is the classic film noir detective where you're like seeing the world through his eyes, and his eyes are fucking flawed. Like his whole opening monologue is like, all I know about is Texas, and down here you're on your own. Like the mindset that this movie puts you in with that opening monologue is not Abby's mindset, who is, if any protagonist is in the movie, it's Abby.
Yeah.
Like it's through the villain. Like he's not exactly a villain. He's just gum in the works, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't even say he's the villain. They're all kind of.
I think Dan Hedaya is the villain. Dan Hedaya.
I think you're right.
He's
Like,
he's like the classic like Coen, like one of their big themes, I think, and you told us about the meaning of Blood Simple, or the origin of that phrase having to do with like something happens, you witness a murder, or you become involved in it, and
basically
you explain
you get it breaks your brain. You get simple because of the the weight of the blood on you.
Yeah, which is a great term, and it that's very like the phrase blood simple. There's another theme in their work, in the Coen brothers' work, which is like a juxtaposition of like a simple person, not necessarily like a dumb person, but like just somebody trying to like live their life according to kind of like the strictures of like normal society, you know what I mean? And being like trying to be satisfied with that, and then that's juxtaposed against someone who's like a schemer, someone who like has like something that they're after and that they're gonna like transgress to achieve, and or to get a hold of, and that's in this movie, to me, it's like John Getz versus like Dan Hedaya in that sense, even though neither of them are really like the ones who move the plot forward. They're the two kind of figures.
Well, nobody moves the plot forward. It's literally like the way that they write movies all the way up through Inside Llewyn Davis, which I know it's not their last movie, but this is the first movie. That's the first movie where they wrote the ending first and then worked backwards from there. Every movie that they ever wrote, they started without knowing how it was going to end, and then just made choices based on what they thought the characters would do. And in this movie, it's like so the thing that makes this movie brilliant to me is that every choice, like they know their characters so well, and they're so like sure with them that like every choice that the character makes is the choice that the character would make. And
Right.
and also they're like there's no end game. Like every single choice that they make is based on whatever happened right before, you know? So like the plot that you're following is literally just like, oh shit, like I don't know anything that's going on. Nobody knows what's going on with any other character. Like, you know, Abby thinks that Ray killed Marty. Marty thinks that Abby killed, or, you know, Ray thinks that Abby killed Marty, whatever. You know,
Yeah.
everybody thinks different things. Visser thinks that he killed Marty, but then he's like, oh shit, like, what do they know? It's just like everybody's, you know, acting from ignorance,
Yeah,
from having,
yeah.
you know, no knowledge, but they're all just sort of like one step to the next, which would make you feel like lost. But the Coen brothers know how to take care of you. Like they know, like through tone and through just being so sure of themselves in their
Yeah.
character choices that you feel taken care of.
Even-
Like, you don't
Totally.
feel lost.
I agree. Oh,
Yeah,
go ahead,
Roger
Chris.
Ebert. I'm sorry. Yeah. Roger Ebert. Just touching right on that. He had almost said that perfectly. He wrote a review and said, "Every individual detail seems to make sense, and every individual choice seems logical, but the choices and details form a bewildering labyrinth. They build crazy walls with sensible bricks." And I think that's like
Yeah.
a really great summary of the film, and especially even crazier when you think that they didn't actually have the ending in mind when they wrote it. You know, a lot of writers, I think they say when you go to writing school or whatever, start with the end, then work backwards because it'll like the end is what everyone's like, yeah, and you have your great idea. You want
That's
that
my
to be the
favorite
ending.
Simpsons joke. You guys know what Simpsons
Yep,
joke?
yep. How the gerbil writes mysteries.
Yeah, the gerbil writes mystery novels under a pen name. How's he do that? He starts at the end and works backwards. So good. Sorry, okay.
Yeah.
Kid, just buy it before she eats her children. Wait, yeah, I was gonna say, Ian, I think you put it really well. Like, yeah, they're so sure about their like tone and about like the way that they're telling the story. Even though I think it's really easy to lose like a lot of the plot details. And like,
Yeah.
I watched this movie with some people actually, and we talked about it afterwards, like on Zoom, and they were like, how did, like, they were just very confused by like the details of the plot, even though they basically followed the story like perfectly and really and got a lot out of the movie and enjoyed it. But I mean, I rewatched the beginning because I wanted to hear that opening monologue again, and you know, Abby says like her first line is like, yeah, you know, Marty gave me a gun for our anniversary, and I was like, how did I miss that line? That's like a very important line, but I had like somehow completely missed that. The Chekhov's gun is like, it was just kind of like blew by me because it's like so out of context. You can't even see the characters' faces. There's the noise from the rain, the noise from the car. So it is this like mix of like being completely sure of themselves and then like, but not spoon feeding you either, which I think is another thing that the Coen brothers do a lot.
They do
kinda
it a
just
lot,
throw their
yeah.
ideas out there. Like Ian, you've mentioned that like there's certain movies where they went into it being like, we're just going for popular success. We just want to be like a mainstream phenomena, but they're not willing to give up any of their like idiosyncrasies or like dumb themselves down kind of like almost ever.
Right. I think, you know, I don't know how intentional this could be, but I do think that like more than almost any director that I can think of, like their movies reward rewatching, you know? It's like there's and to the point that like, you know, almost everybody I know like didn't give a shit about Big Lebowski until the third time that they watched it. You know what I mean? Like there's always like moments in their movies that will stand with you and stick with you. Certainly, like my impression of this movie, if you would have talked to me about it in 2004 or something, would have been, oh yeah, that movie where Dan Hedaya gets buried alive, and that movie where like fucking Emmet Walsh gets a fucking knife through his hand, and his hand is on the other side of a wall, and it's like this incredible imagery that like you can't even figure out how you get to that moment, but like they do it in a way that makes sense somehow, where he's literally like firing a gun while his hand is in another. And like these are the things that stick with you, and then like you watch it and you find the plot, later, because like you do want to rewatch it, and then you do end up like appreciating it more the third and fourth time. To me, I don't know. That's
Absolutely. That was my experience too. I mean, the first time I watched it, I was like, okay, that was cool. I just had a feeling about it. And I mean, we talked about it after we convened the very first time, I think, about it. I'm like, what, was I missing something? Why does he go back? Why does Visser go back and like kill them? Isn't he done? Is he? But then that subtle little detail I'd somehow missed was the lighter that he left behind, right?
Yeah.
A little detail and stuff like that. And then, like you just mentioned, just something as subtle as like a reference to a gun that literally dictates so many subsequent steps in the movie. It keeps coming right back around. So those subsequent viewings are really important, I think, for certain Coen films, especially ones with more elaborate plot structure.
Yeah, their movies are so rich, and especially like as the film kind of like landscape becomes just more and more dominated with just like hero's journey kind of like 3-act stories.
Yeah.
It's so cool to go back to these old movies and just like not know what's going to happen next,
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, those kind of labyrinthine plots are kind of a staple of like film noir, which I think is like one of their big kind of influences.
So, you were just sort of stopped me to say that like you think that Dan Hedaya is the antagonist to this movie, which I can agree with. But like, is Abby the protagonist of the movie?
Well, all I meant to say was that Abby kind of starts the plot off by seducing John Getz, and so that's like the one.
She also gets the final. She's the last man standing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean,
she's
the only, and then she seems to have the only like, Dan Hedaya and John both just kind of like play these hands that they're dealt and are just kind of like being reactive to what's happening around them. She like I don't know. She like reaches out to the other guy who works at the bar. She's like trying to like figure out what's going on, trying to. She has an arc. She goes, she escapes from her shitty husband, who like, we don't know if he's like abusive to her, but like he's definitely an asshole. And like his, like at the end, like the fact that like she's saying like, I'm not afraid of you. Like, it seems like she did kind of like, this movie was about like her getting her independence, and at the cost of sort of John Getz's life,
Right.
Yeah.
What I wonder though, like, so if they had started the movie as most sort of movies would, like with the protagonist giving the opening monologue, like it would have shifted the tone so much. Because I don't even know what her opening monologue would have been, but like I can't imagine her view of the world, which is like what that opening monologue is setting up, is the same as his. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see like in an alternate world with like less experimental directors. I feel like it would have been, just starting with the car, like her saying sort of her spiel to him in the car. I don't know.
I think, that opening monologue is more important than we might think, especially as we look on at the overarching themes behind a lot of other Coen brother movies. We talked about, we'll talk about in Fargo and No Country for Old Men specifically, but the idea of this, we're going to create a world that's got people in it, but it's also like a world where evil happens and bad shit happens, and that's just what you can have to suck it up and deal with it. Like, this is what it is. Sorry, sunshine. Like, this, it ain't no, walk in the park every day here, So, but there's always hope typically, in these films. But I think setting that tone initially from the person's perspective kind of sets that tone, and it maintains that tone even after the film's over.
I think specifically No Country for Old Men was what I was thinking of, where it's like, you're watching the movie through Tommy Lee Jones's eyes, even though the majority of the action is not his story. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like most of the movie is not like the Tommy Lee Jones storyline, but like him being the sort of bookends and just sort of the constant like narration through it sets the tone for this world that you're living in, where it's like, this place is fucked up, Mm-hmm. I don't know. Ethan Coen was a philosophy guy. He went to philosophy, he was a philosophy student, and his philosophy is like sort of the one that I'm most curious about by doing this podcast, of like trying to figure out, they get painted with like being nihilists or being like, cynics, or I don't know what you want to call it, like where they're just, they think that the world is trash. if there's any criticism that I have of them, there's two criticisms I have of them. But if there's one, then, if there's one that's debatable, it's that like sometimes they do treat like people that they look down on like shit. And like usually those people are poor and sort of like, whatever. So like there's that part of it, but like, that's something that we'll sort of get into more as the movies go on, I think, because this movie doesn't really have that to a large degree, but I don't know. I think that like, I want to know, like, I want to try to get to the bottom of like what they're saying like through their movies, because like he's definitely saying something. Like it's like philosophy is a huge part of all their movies. This one starts it off with saying like, in Russia, people just put in what they can and then they get free stuff. Well, it doesn't work that way. Like they're trying to figure shit out.
Yeah, I mean, he puts communism in a pretty positive light. He says everybody pulls for everybody else, which is like makes it sound nice. He's like, I don't know about that. What I know is Texas. I mean that exactly. To me that says two things that are like really important for the Coen brothers. Like, you are a product of your time and place, and I think in this movie that's like really strong. That like. You act a certain way, you speak a certain way because you're from a certain place, and the language that you use actually like determines like your path in life to an extent. I mean, for the kind of good old boy main character in this movie, his inability to like articulate his thoughts and feelings, even though it's not necessary for him to start the relationship with Frances McDormand. She says like, when you don't say anything, it's nice, but his inability to like speak and like be open about his feelings, be open about what he's going through, pretty much dooms him and her to an extent, and so I think that's like a really important thing. I think that comes up a lot in the other movies, like how people are really just like products of their time and place, and all their movies, like almost all their movies like take place in the past, and have to do with these kind of like genres. I was thinking about like, I organize my DVDs by date, because like if I'm in the mood for like a black and white movie from like the 30s, like it's more important that I go to that shelf than it is like the specific director, and I was thinking like, there's a lot of great directors who do their own thing with movies, but like time is the greatest auteur, like, you know what I mean? Like the time that you produce in defines what your product is, like more than, your sensibility or anything like that, arguably. So
I can see that.
So anyway,
I agree.
I think that's
go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say. So I think that's a big thing, and then another thing is like I think it is an allusion to capitalism, to how like power operates, and I always think of like the Frances McDormand line in Fargo where she's like, you did all this for a little bit of money, and it's like in this movie the one who's being driven by money is really Emmet Walsh, but that is like a recurring thing in their movies, is that like, like people are striving to get ahead. They're trying to get something more.
And then like if they have like a avatar for like a hero like that is in any of their movies, then you would have to say it's the dude. Like the dude is like the one like superhero that they've created in a weird way. Yeah. And he is what you're talking about. Like he's so anti-capitalism. Like he's just that like motto.
The
like,
point here, the Port Huron statement. He's a co-author. But he absolutely. And he also is a character who can kind of like blow in the wind, right? Like keep saying like he's like a tumbleweed, like he can just bounce off stuff and not be affected. Like because he doesn't have as rigid sort of an identity maybe as other people. I mean, that's another thing in this movie, is that like identity is very malleable. And in The Big Lebowski, like the John Polito like thinks that the dude is like a detective because he's like watching him from like from the sidelines. And in this movie, the PI is mistaken for a swinger because he's like rolling his own cigarettes, and the hippies think he's like a like just like rolling like a doobie, like on the, I don't know where they are, like what looks like the Grand Canyon to me,
like,
but
make out point.
Yeah, and I don't know.
talking about time and place. I was thinking about the year this movie came out. It's 1984, and we've look at other films. Certain years don't have very great films, and this one had a number of classics actually that came out. So I think at the time this movie was kind of more toward the bottom. But the top grossing film that year was Beverly Hills Cop, and they had Ghostbusters, of course, came out that year.
Heard of it?
Gremlins, Karate Kid, Neverending Story.
Dune.
What's that?
1980. I said Dune.
Dune.
1984 is one of my favorite movie years actually of all time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
well, yeah, and I think we're running out of time for this episode, but I do want to especially going forward, really talk about where their standing is in just culture at in general, because they are later than when auteur theory starts. Auteurism comes out of the Scorsese's and Coppola's and people that, and then they're the next generation, and there's a handful of people that are in there, and they do kind of I know Travis has said this before in our talks, but they do sort of bridge the gap from those guys to what becomes the next wave of independent filmmakers and auteur filmmakers, more than anybody else maybe, because they've just been so steadily making a movie every 1 to 3 years and constantly evolving with what movies are doing, and they do sort of end up hitting a place where they aren't cutting edge anymore, and then they always reset and become sort of new again, and that whatever they do then sort of restructures what culture as a main does for the next 10 years too. I don't know, they're really important to all of that, and I think that I don't know, not to I'll really quickly throw out my other criticism because I feel like I'm talking too good about them. I did say the part where they kind of look down, but then the other part of them that I don't like, and I don't want to pimp you guys into talking about this, but they're terrible with race and just what's the word I'm looking for, where you're representation is the word I'm looking for. They're not good at it. They still aren't good at it. Mm-hmm. They've been doing it for 38 years. They're still fucking up.
Yet ironically, with Blood Simple, it seems they actually have more than one African-American character who isn't a typewritten African-American character per se.
This is the only one.
Maurice, yeah. But Maurice isn't like Bill Cobb's in Hudsucker Proxy with the, it had to be a black man. They wrote that for a southern sounding black man, where Maurice is he's sort of a character who happens to be black, and he fits and he works, and it's great. And he actually brings a good bit of I don't want to say diversity, but a different sort of a visual and energetic appeal to the movie in a way. Very minor. He's a small character, obviously, but it's funny that he's But
it works that he's he doesn't. Yeah. They've got their 4 mains, and none of them needed to be right. Black guys or whatever.
Of course,
or even should have been for their parts, but.
But it's weird that they don't
it's
really.
Great that they did. That's what we should have.
Totally, and they don't really go back to that too much later. You know what I mean? We see again, Bill Cobbs is the quote magical Negro, and and the only black person in Hudsucker Proxy. Films like Fargo are totally devoid, which makes sense given the location and whatnot. Other things then, Big Lebowski's really in L.A. There's no black people in all of L.A. in the 1980s. You know what I mean? What the fuck?
And then they even with Buster Scruggs, they're I get that they're making these
period,
not even period, but genre specific movies that are cowboys versus Indians kind of things.
But they specifically undercut or undermine a lot of those Western conventions in that movie. And I really thought there was, because it was episodic, and there was one episode where the Indians were just totally dehumanized, totally seen as separate from all the actual characters in the film. I really thought they were going to turn that around in another episode, and I was going to be it would be very easy to just have one character who's a Native American and see it from the other perspective, and it never happens, and I was kind of shocked.
And that's their latest movie, and I do love that movie, but that's one of those things where it's God damn it, you guys, you guys have a responsibility. Not just because of their success, but just because they're putting stuff to film. Like they're like filmmakers are the culture movers. Like
Yeah.
that's sort of why
They-
I love movies.
They did direct that movie Dead Presidents, though, right?
Right. That was a white guy.
That's
Well, I
like the
think that
one
they-
movie I think that.
They did a pass on Darkman for Sam Raimi, and Liam Neeson is like, I think he's got some feelings about black people, I think. So I don't know.
Well, there's actually, there's a line, I think, and I'm not sure I even heard it correctly, but I think there's a line where Emmet Walsh makes a comment about Dan Hedaya thinking that it was the black guy at the bar who was having the affair with Frances McDormand and not John Getz. Like that's what he was expecting. I can't remember the exact line, but it was sort of like, oh, you thought it was the other guy with kind of
Right.
like a racial like connotation there. Like there was something like worse about that or something like that. And I was like, oh, are they like, I always thought it was really interesting because I was like, are they exploring racism for like just a moment, And then like it's never brought up again. And it's not really important to the story, but I thought it was an interesting detail because it never comes up in any of the other movies.
Right.
Like they are, later on in their career, like they explore Judaism and sort of Jewish,
The Jewish
stereotypes
experience,
and
yeah.
things, the Jewish experience, like so heavily. And then even in movies that aren't A Simple Man, like they do it so often in their later movies. But then I think that I don't think that they're clearly like well-educated, like smart guys that have thought about this. Like they both went to like NYU and Princeton or something. Like they went to like these, so I'm just saying like, it's not like they haven't dealt with like thinking about this thing. So that makes it even more sad to me that they do sort of ignore it. You know what I mean?
I'm not sure I agree that they've thought about it that much. I mean, just because you're smart doesn't mean you think about racism. I mean, if you go to NYU, if you go to like an elite like education place, like these college campuses were not the woke dungeons that they are today.
True.
Back then. Like,
I guess you're right. I just feel like the fact that like my other criticism of them is that they like go after like poor people a little harshly, which like only half the time I would say that they do that is it feels wrong. The other half it feels right. And I just mean that like they walk a thin line between judging them and portraying them. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But I think the fact that they were not like, they've never had a foot in that world at all, but they keep going back to that. That's why I think that like they must think about it a little bit, because you can't like explore the world of poor people as much as they do and not think about like, but what about black folks? You know what I mean? Like it's crazy. Like
but
it's a huge part of the world.
I think if you're thinking about things in terms of class and like, power dynamics, and you're from Minnesota, and I don't know, and you're like kind of like in an elite like world that like you can be blind to racism. Like you can just not have that experience, and like you can be intellectual, live the life of the mind, and like not be curious about other people's experience. You know what I mean? Like they have a very specific, I think they have very specific interests that they kind of return to again and again, and the fact that like they never explore kind of racism and like the repercussions of that or how that operates. I think maybe it's maybe not something that they think about and not something that they're really interested in.
That's a shame.
Or something they feel ill-equipped to deal with in the first place, maybe. So they just might as well avoid it. Even if they are aware of it, maybe they just feel like we're probably not the people to do this. So let's just focus on what we know.
And I don't want to like
exactly.
I don't want to like be the guy that I always am, where I'm like judging people because I'm an asshole. But like knowing what we know now, or at least what I feel like I know now, is that like there is a responsibility, even when you don't know the right way to do something, to at least include some representation of the people that you're like ignoring. I don't know. There's a tricky thing that I get if you're like, I'm not going to take on, we talked about like Sofia Coppola leaving the slaves and any black people out of this Civil War, movie she made, The Beguiled. And like, she's just like, well, that's not my story to tell, so I'm not going to tell that story. But in doing so, she like completely just erases them from the history. And that's clearly not the right way to do it. And it's the same thing with them, where it's like there has to be a way, and they are smart enough to figure that way out, to be like, okay, I get it, it's not my story to tell, but maybe don't make Big Lebowski take place in 1991 LA and like there is not a black person to be seen on screen. Like that is not 1991 LA, you know, like, I don't know. That's my main criticism of like that we'll have to watch out for going forward and talk more about as like the movies. I know it weighs on us like further as we go on because we're going to watch these movies in order. And like, you know, like I said at the beginning, like we've done a couple of them and it already starts to like weigh on you and be like, okay, all right, anytime now, guys, like get it together, like bring something, bring someone. I don't know. Other great motifs that we're going to wrap up now because it's been over an hour, but, you know, this movie introduces the circle motif that like runs through all of their films so much, where it's like everything is cyclical, everything, like they introduce the circular fan that's going around in his office and it keeps panning to it. And then like throughout the course of their filmography, that keeps coming back. It's got like money being passed over to a guy on the other side of a desk. There's all these things that like are introduced in this movie that will come back. Is there any other ones that you guys think of?
The big fat private investigator in a Volkswagen Beetle comes back in Big Lebowski.
That's right.
The specific line that Emmet Walsh says where he's like, now who's stupid or something like that. Literally that gets said like by 3 other characters in different movies.
And also it's not just that they, you know, do that, but also like within a single movie, they love to say something and then say it again later in the movie.
The less you know, the better.
Or exactly.
Or like, what are you, a marriage counselor?
Yeah.
Right.
They do that.
8-year-olds, dude.
It's their sort of trick to like pinpoint what you should be taking from a scene or what like, you know, I don't know.
But I think it's also like how language passes, you know, like how we build our like, how we communicate and how we like build our identities too. And like, you know,
I think that they are so.
That's one of John Lebowski. That's one of the dude's superpowers. You mentioned like is that he can, whatever he hears, he can just say in the next scene, like to get him through.
Right. Yeah.
This aggression will not stand, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that they are so funny. I think that they're really good writers. I mean, listen, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the Coen brothers are good writers. I'm just kidding. No, they're clearly great writers, but I think that they are like, I'm surprised how like funny they were out the gate and how funny they still can be. Mm-hmm. You know, even in their unfunny movies, like it's just, you know, they managed to like make really funny things happen. I don't know. Well, I think in a time when like what passes for a funny movie now is just fun, you know, like you got like like the majority of comedies now are just like, it's not about jokes and it's not even about tone. It's about like, don't you wish that you were these guys kind of thing? And usually it's these guys. Like it's literally like movies like Tag and Game Night and stuff where it's just like, look we're all having so much fun. There's no way you're not going to smile. And sometimes it works and sometimes it's like actually fun to watch. But in general, you're not fucking laughing because it's not funny. It's just fun. And these guys know how to like make you laugh. Like I do think that like it's not just about like showing guys having a good time, obviously.
Right. No, this movie, they're hilarious. I also wanted just to call out, this is like their first collaborator with, is his name Carter Burwell, the guy who writes the scores?
Thank you. I keep
so he, I guess he does like basically all their scores and they're all amazing. But again, like talking about being like of your time and place, like this score sounds so much less like a Carter Burwell, Coen Brothers score than it does like a John Carpenter horror movie score. And it's a great like piece of music, but it's funny how
it's really
their kind of like thing isn't too. It's absolutely, and it works for the movie, but it doesn't feel like they've like they're like the director or them or their I don't know, their relationship is not what it will be, I guess.
Yeah, I think you know, I was thinking about the score of this movie and how like it is so circular. Like that refrain is just like constantly playing in like a circular refrain. And like that really does play into like their fucking circle aesthetic, that like it's all just like this sort of repeating cyclical thing. Like, I don't know, I really like appreciated that like right out of the get from this movie. Like
Totally.
it's just this sort of weird synth piano like circular refrain. Like it's really good.
Yeah, well, Carter Burwell is able to like write incredibly diverse scores, like for whatever the Coen brothers come up with. So maybe in that way, it is like, you know, this is their 80 neo-noir movie, like you know, like quasi horror movie. Maybe it is like just the perfect.
Well, it's also like there's no budget. You know what I mean? Like they had $1.5 million, and they're paying him Emmet Walsh, and like, you know, I'm sure that that's a huge part of it. Like you get into Hudsucker Proxy, and they've got this full orchestra, like, you know, symphony. Yeah. And like, you know, that's purely a budget thing too.
But it's also a time thing, because like synth, you know, kind of like that kind of music was not like in vogue at that time either. Yeah.
All right. We should wrap up this talk and then talk about Raising Arizona next week, right?
Yeah, unless we want to re-record this one more time. I'm not.
I mean, no, I think that's fine. What if we just keep doing it?
Until we get it right?
Over and over. Just play the various different, that's all this show is composed of, is just us talking like 1 million times about Blood Simple each week.
I can't wait to talk about Raising Arizona. I already know Travis's favorite Coen Brothers movie, and you know you're gonna kind of have a field day with it, and that's, you know, it's gonna be fun to talk about.
I'm looking forward to watching it again. All right, guys.
That was fun to talk. Yeah.
All right.
Let's do it.
Thanks for listening, everybody. All right.
See ya.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Auteur Detour. We'll see you again next week.